First of all, I have to say that it's an honor to have this opportunity. My name is Rosa Malango, and I am the daughter of late Thomas Malango Bobangongo Ekoka and of Pilar Diomediangani, who is currently a senator. In terms of the milestones of my childhood was marked by tragedy, by resilience, and by an incredible sense of dignity and respect for where I was born. I was born in Equatorial Guinea. I'm the independence child in my family. My parents had a long engagement and decided not to get married until their country became independent. So Equatorial Guinea became independent in 1968. My father was part of Monalije, the independence movement. He was one of the signatories to the Carta Magna for our independence, and he was one of the 6 who sat in the General Assembly when Equatorial Guinea became the 126th member of the United Nations in 1968. I was born the following year in 1969. Unfortunately, shortly after independence, the first president of the Republic, Macias Nguema, he became a dictator, and he began a persecution against intellectuals. So my parents went from celebrating independence to having to seek asylum. My mother was the first pediatric nurse of the nation. She was actually the nurse for the first president of the Republic. And she found herself having to flee with me as a baby to the States to join my dad. So I remember my parents telling me that I was born in a beautiful country in the heart of Africa. That at the time of independence, our human development indicators were some of the best on the continent. I was also told that I came from a country that, unfortunately, as a result of leadership, we had lost a lot of people, especially a lot of intellectuals. And I was raised to be proud of where I was born and to always be ready to give back. Being raised with parents who are refugees and asylum seekers around the world, they also taught me to be very proud of being a global citizen and to never hesitate to make home wherever I am. So I learned to respect diversity. I learned to adapt to new realities. I started learning also languages as a result. My childhood was in the United States. My 3 brothers were born there at the time. I learned Portuguese shortly thereafter when my father became an advisor to the late Samora Machel, the president of Mozambique. And it was from there that the current president, Teodoro Obiangema, invited my parents to come back. I remember my first cognizant visit to Equatorial Guinea. I was around 11, 12. It seemed like a magical place, but it was so full of sadness. There were no roads, there were no streets, there were no lights. It was so dark. And everybody was in tears, having lost loved ones for one reason or another. So that was the Equatorial Guinea that I came to discover in my early teens. I left to go back to study overseas, so I did my high school in Spain, used to come home on vacation. I pursued my first undergraduates in Nigeria, really wanting to have an African experience as part of my education. And then I started my UN career. So it's a childhood that born in Equatorial Guinea, going to the US, becoming a refugee, going to Mozambique, homecoming at 11, 12, and then seeing it now as an adult. I feel a great sense of responsibility and a great sense of duty to share the history and narrative, and also to empower. One of the things that I have done is that I realized so few people knew about where I was from. Some people think that Equatorial Guinea is somewhere in the Caribbean. So I had to explain our history. We are the only former Spanish colony in Africa. And that made me start doing research about Equatorial Guinea. And it's so interesting to learn that some of the initial inhabitants were pygmies from the 17th centuries, and that you learn about the migration of the Bantus and the connection of Equatorial Guinea it has to the rest of Africa. So small country, great potential, incredibly complex history, and a history of resilience. So being the first, I'm cognizant that first I have to explain to people where I'm from. The second thing that's a big challenge is to explain the Equatorial Guinea of today. It had nothing to do with the Equatorial Guinea that I knew when I was 11, 12. The Equatorial Guinea of today is an oil-producing country, has incredible infrastructure, incredible capacities, and is looking to diversify its economy, is trying to work towards an inclusive economic model. So I find myself also trying to understand what is it trying to do, what is its profile, and being able to explain that because it's part of who I am. The third part is recognizing that I'm not just from Equatorial Guinea, I'm a woman from Equatorial Guinea, and as an African woman, younger women come to me to ask, what was my journey, what did it take? And so I'm also always aware about how to inspire other young women from Africa, and in particular from Equatorial Guinea, so that I'm not the only one. My dream is that 3 years from now, there should be 4 or 5 women from Equatorial Guinea serving in senior leadership positions in the United Nations. I believe that the first part of my inspiration is from when I was little, he always told us that we have a sense of service to humanity. And he would tell me, you were born in Africa, you were raised around the world, don't forget to give back. If it wasn't for those opportunities, I wouldn't have the life I have. So this is a way for me to give back. I'm very proud of the fact that I had a 24-year career of the UN to date that has included serving in war zones, natural disasters, in different continents, in different responsibilities, public information and management. And that I come to this level with that sense of giving back everything that I learned to do that. I see myself as a leader. I think that the journey I've had until now was to prepare me for leadership. And so as a global citizen, this is part of my responsibility to now be a leader of the UN and help countries to fulfill their development dreams.
What do you find most fulfilling about your role as UN Resident Coordinator?
Meeting the people. It's amazing. One of the things that I really love as Resident Coordinator is the fact that you move in all circles of life. You go to see villages, you meet with refugees, you meet with presidents and heads of states, and you are one of the few people who has that access because we represent the biggest partnership forum in the world. We represent the convener, the custodian of international principles and international law. So being able to go down and see the Women Markets Association in Arua or meet the youth peace warriors in Moroto and to understand their aspirations, and then being able to sit down with ministers and ambassadors to find solutions and know that you're actually changing lives, that for me is priceless. Another part that is really inspirational of what I'm doing is opportunities like this, when I get invited to tell my story and to inspire other people. And I think it's very important for people to know no one arrives at this level just like that. I had a very hard journey. I had a lot of setbacks, but I was committed to taking the step forward. So that also allows you to look back and with some satisfaction and learn and be inspired and figure out what can I tell the next generation, so that the next generation who become leaders, they don't have to go through some of the challenges that I did, but they can still become leaders. and to the citizens from my country, with hard work and determination, anything is possible. I believe that if I'm to take like concrete examples, that first memory of coming back to Equatorial Guinea when President Teodoro Obiang invited my parents back, and he had all the political exiles given the amnesty for them to return home. And that no road, no infrastructure, no food, Equatorial Guinea of 1979. And then go to Equatorial Guinea now, today, where almost every single district has its own airport, where we have mega bridges across estuaries, where there's the own airline, where there's universities everywhere. That is an amazing transformation. And when I was young, I used to hear the grown-ups talk about we're doing a national experiment on democracy and on development, and I didn't understand what it was. And now I understand that they were trying to find a local and sustainable way to be able to improve quality of life. So I think that a first transformation has happened. Now is the second transformation that that needs to take place. And the second transformation is for my generation, and it should be about transformation of the economy, and keeping the heritage alive and keeping our sense of self within the continent and within the world. So I've seen an Equatorial Guinea that was a beneficiary of humanitarian assistance, that needed help from everybody for everything, to an Equatorial Guinea that when there was the floods in Japan, they made a donation. When there was a problem in Haiti, they made a donation. When the peacekeeping force had to start in Central African Republic, the first financiers were Equatorial Guinea. When the Ebola crisis happened, they gave money to transport doctors to West Africa. So now they're thinking as a donor, what to do as a donor, and how to be innovative as a donor. I recall, I think it's about 5 years ago, it was Equatorial Guinea that established a food security fund within FAO for African countries, because they wanted to make sure that the UN helped African countries first. So they put in $30 million, and then they spoke to Angola and other countries to also join in to put that fund. So instead of being a recipient, they're now thinking about how to be a donor. And if you look at them today, they're now looking more at the bilateral, so partnership with China, partnerships with some other African countries, and how you do that exchange of knowledge. Okay, they managed to do oil, but they can learn about agriculture from Uganda. How do they make sure they have those mutually reinforceable partnerships going forward? So I've seen the Equatorial Guinea beneficiary. I'm becoming acquainted with this new Equatorial Guinea that wants to be a donor, that wants to be a contributor to the global sphere. And my dream is that we are successful in becoming a responsible, inclusive country on the global stage. I believe that one has to look at what are some of the global trends. There was the independence movement for all of the African countries, and I think that we went through that. We were among the unfortunate ones that had a lot of setbacks because of the dictatorship we had under Macias. And then, came this new renaissance. Yeah, I remember there was a time when people were talking about Africa rising, where it was among the countries trying to figure itself out. How do you create your capacity to develop and have your own vision? How do you establish partnerships and not just look at memberships to be able to do that? And I think that when the world adopted the 2030 Agenda and the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, where it says all countries have the same shared global commitment in terms of development, that also had an impact. Because now each country had to go and look at, okay, how does my national vision contribute to the greater good? Because everybody's started talking about, yes, we have to do industrialization, but it has to be environment friendly because of climate change. So what does that mean for those who are oil producing countries? And then there was a big issue about youth. If you look at people, Africa is the youngest continent in the world. So how do you make sure that your youth contribute to your development and become a demographic dividend? This was also a global dynamic, but it has local implications. And I think the fact that Africa adopted its vision, Africa 2063, where again, they're looking at, the Africa we want. How do you have free trade? How do you have free movement of people? All those things had repercussions for the country going forward. Well, I think that by men taking action, if I come to think about it, I think that there's perhaps a couple of things that we have to do. The first is in our homes. What do we teach our sons and daughters when they're growing up? Do we teach the brothers to respect their sisters? Do we make sure that they both have to do the chores? So first you have to start from that level. And I think that in the 21st century, we have to make sure that if you have a boy and a girl, you don't just task the girl and you don't task the boy. And that's a discussion that has to happen on the rural level as well as in the urban centers to make sure that we're doing that. But secondly, the reason why I started off by saying we need men as champions to take action is because if you look at where there's been a difference in terms of women leaders, it has been because men have taken the decisions. So, for example, the new UN Secretary General, he has achieved parity for the first time in the UN history, 72 years of existence, both at headquarters and in the field. At my level, he made a conscious decision. So we're now 50-50 women leaders, both representing him in the field as resident coordinators and among his undersecretary generals, his cabinet in New York. Conscious decision. He found the women from all over the world. It's done. If I look at the country where I am right now, Uganda, it's the same thing. You have a Speaker of Parliament, you have certain heads of agencies, the revenue, roads, investment, all women. So this can be done. But more importantly, Uganda has a law where it says there has to be women MPs. And so you can do things that help generate a community, a generation of women leaders, so then they'll be able to be qualified to go forward. I am appreciative of the fact that Equatorial Guinea is one of the few African countries where the president of the parliament is a woman. Teresa, she's a woman. So again, it's not like we don't have them. So we have them, but how do we nurture them to be in senior leadership positions that also are not just linked to gender, because people have this tendency, if you put a woman in gender, you think you've done something. No, you can have a woman a head of defense, a minister of defense, you have a woman, a minister of finance. There are capable women, but we have to nurture them and promote them and recognize them when they do the right thing. I believe that the Sustainable Development Goals are important because they give all countries in the world a chance to have a new narrative, but based on the same principles. I believe that they're important because the SDGs, at the end of the day, it's about people and planet being placed at the epicenter of any vision for development. And particularly for countries in Africa that are all emerging economies, that is critically important. I also believe that the SDGs are important because they look for local solutions. They talk about domestication of the SDGs and leaving no one behind. So it's a whole of society approach towards development. So each country gets a chance to look at itself and say, based on my architecture and my heritage and my strengths, this is how I'm going to pursue my development objectives. So I really, really think that it is an important agenda. I'm excited that Africa is doing a lot of innovations with it. And I think that with the green economy opportunities and with the youth that we have, we should definitely be at the forefront of sustainable development going forward.